Charm City. It could be a gem of the East Coast. But with violent crime,
got kids killing kids out here like they fighting in a war.
Do you feel any safer now that there's been an arrest?
Honestly, I'm sad to say I don't feel safer.
failing schools,
It's tough to be a parent to witness this because you feel like you send your kids to school so they can get the education. Now they're not getting it.
Are we expecting these kids to kill off themselves? I mean, we see the number of teen shootings happening just this year. What jobs are we preparing these kids for?
questions about transparency, and doubts about where taxpayer money is going.
When you're sending it to a nonprofit, there is a lack of transparency, lack of accountability, and this is going to be a growing problem for Baltimore City taxpayers.
It can be hard to be optimistic.
The state of Baltimore is a state of emergency right now.
Nothing in this city is being accomplished. It's falling apart. They're cutting programs, they're cutting funding, and then they expect us to come back out here in society and win.
Now, the people of Baltimore City have a decision to make, to choose who will lead our city for the next 4 years.
Well, the numbers can be alarming.
Fox 45 News is getting the answers you need most. This is your voice,
At the end of the day, we're our own worst enemy for real.
your future.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us for a Your Voice, Your Future City in Crisis Town Hall. I'm Mackenzie Frost. Soon, Baltimore City voters will decide who they want to see lead the city for the next 4 years. We're sitting down with various mayoral candidates to get some answers to questions you need asked, and those answers are so desperately needed. Tonight, our discussion and topic is centered around public safety. Let's introduce our panel this evening. We have Democratic mayoral candidate and former mayor Sheila Dixon. We have the president of the Maryland Fraternal Order of Police, Clyde Boatwright, and we have former chief judge of the Baltimore City Circuit Court, Wanda Hurd. Now, we did invite Mayor Brandon Scott to participate in this discussion tonight, but his office refused our invitation. And I know that the primary election, there are various candidates. We are basing tonight's discussion around recent polling showing this race is a two-person race. There are still several months to go, and if and when that situation changes, so will our panelists. Let's get right to some topics and questions. First, panelists, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for spending tonight with us.
Thanks for having us.
I want to get right to one of the topics, and it's very topical because today Councilman Eric Costello sent a letter to the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety, Anthony Barksdale, talking about a recent string of violent assaults. And the letter, it's right here, it was addressed earlier today, and he talks about one in particular that took place in the Otterbein neighborhood. And I want to read one specific part of this, talking about various assaults. He says, "This shakes our collective confidence in this administration's crime plan. While the murder rate may be declining, the number matters little if Baltimoreans do not feel safe." And that is something that we continue to hear from community members all across the city. Former Mayor Sheila Dixon, first, I want to just get your take on this letter, and if you agree that the situation that we're dealing with right now really shakes the confidence in the current administration's crime plan.
Well, first of all, there were multiple issues that happened today, and in watching the news about that specific incident in Audubon and the fact that there was a witness who called the police department right when it was happening and said, "I am a witness," and then no one showed up till 4 o'clock this afternoon. That is unacceptable. I hope the young man who was robbed, and I believe he might have been beaten a little, is okay. But that was a prime example of where our police department, that night shift, which they call the midnight shift, the slower time of the night, somebody should have responded right away. The fact that you had someone there who saw it, witnessed it, and who was willing to speak out on it.
Clyde, from a policing perspective, what do you think needs to happen if officers are responding slow? We're seeing slower response times, and we often hear from people that sometimes no one shows up.
So, constituent services is one of the top priorities of policing. If you have a resident that contacts you and asks for your assistance or requests help, it is our job to get there as quickly as possible. Once the call is dispatched, there should be no delay. And so I would encourage those that are impacted by this to look at the call log to see when was the call dispatched, why wasn't it dispatched, and see what the priority calls were ahead of that.
Judge Hurd, we often hear about sending messages to criminals, and sometimes those messages are sent from inside the courtroom during a sentencing, or perhaps during when someone is facing charges. From your perspective, in your experience inside the courtroom, what needs to change to get really a grip on this string or rash of assaults and robberies, car thefts? What needs to happen from inside the court?
Well, I think, I'd like to answer that question twofold. First of all, it depends on what the sentence is. If an individual is receiving time served, they've been in jail and they're released from custody, there's not much a judge can say or do. If the person is placed on probation, then there's a sentence of some sort hanging over that person's head. And you can do some things. Conditions of probation can be outlined, and if there's certain activities that you're aware that the defendant was engaged in that placed them in your courtroom in the first place, you can order that they not do those things, like be out of their house after a certain hour. I know that I often would put curfews on my probationers. Of course, they didn't like that, and they thought that I was checking on them, which was not the case. But that's okay. I would try to communicate with other members of their family or other people that I knew that wanted them to also obey the law and not find themselves back in a courtroom. And often they would give me a call and say, hey, can you bring so-and-so in, and sort of waggle your finger at them. They don't have to know how you know that they weren't in the house. And I know you're saying to yourself, well, why is that the judge's responsibility? Well, it's the role of parole and probation to monitor those probationers. But when I was sitting on the bench, it was also my responsibility. If I gave you a sentence, that means I'm telling the community that I'm releasing you out in the community, and I don't believe you're going to commit a crime because I'm placing you on probation. So I felt that it was an obligation to me personally to make sure that that person was obeying laws. They had a drug problem, they got treatment. They didn't have a job, that they went to job training, or that I ordered them to do certain things while on probation to try to change their activity. But I also would like to address the first part of your question.
Sure.
When you were talking about the criminal activity in the neighborhoods. I live in a neighborhood that had a rash of break-ins and has continued to be targeted. Actually, I live down the street from the mayor, the soon-to-be mayor. And we've had problems. So much so that we called an emergency meeting of our community, and about almost 200 people showed up. Community residents concerned about the rash of break-ins and carjackings and car thefts and other activities that were occurring in the neighborhood. And basically, there were some folks there from the police department that listened to us. But we really didn't get much of a change in the behavior that was taking place. Because there were break-ins and carjackings and car thefts, they were low priority compared to what was going around in the periphery of where we live. But for the residents who pay their taxes and live in their houses, they had fear. So much so, last night, I did my community on patrol from 9 to midnight. Now, everyone in our neighborhood is driving around, not everyone, but those that have volunteered, to try to ensure that our neighborhood is safe. Is that my job? Can't I expect that a patrol car is going to roll through my neighborhood periodically at night when we've been having break-ins? Do I need to be in my vehicle driving around my neighborhood for 3 hours because I'm trying to assist my neighbors in feeling safe? There's a problem when you don't put the safety and the concern of your citizens ahead of everything else.
Former Mayor, I want to ask you, given the rise in some of these violent incidents that we're talking about, excluding homicides and non-fatal shootings, do you think the current administration has really operated almost with blinders on, focusing so much on reducing the homicides and non-fatal shootings, which we have seen this year compared to last year, which last year was nearly a record high? But we are seeing a rise in robberies, car thefts, assaults. Has that fallen off the radar of the administration?
You can't ignore any type of crime in the city. You can play the number game with murders and numbers of guns you're collecting, but it's about the quality of life for every neighborhood, for every citizen. And you can't ignore that or prioritize quality of life. And that's one of the things, and I know people say you don't want to go on the past, but one of the things we focused on in order to reduce crime, not only with the number of guns off the street and the number of murders reduced, but the quality of life in neighborhoods. We should not have to look behind our back and feel that something is going on. Or, you know, I agree and disagree with the judge, because I think having the citizens on patrol helps when you have the support of the police department, because we've got to get people to be engaged in their communities and neighborhoods.
Who do you give credit to for this reduction in homicides and non-fatal shootings that the city is experiencing right now?
I'm not inside, so I can't see what is going on or what's not going on. I think across the country things are going down with reduction of violent crime and homicides. I think there's a combination of things that are happening across the country. But to be more specific to Baltimore,
Ivan Bates.
I would say that there is a strategy and plan, but again, let's go back to the quality of life. People have to feel safe. Nobody wants to come. Today alone on the news, when I was watching the brief amount of news that I saw, it was not just that incident. There was incident after incident after incident that was going on. A carjack with a 5-year-old child in it. A shooting right near us in Windsor Mill. So, you know, I've never played the number game. My philosophy has always been we have to look at things holistically, and we have to deal with multiple things at one time and making sure that we retain. You know, I'll take our neighborhood, Hunting Ridge, a prime example. We had a number of older individuals who have left the community, and those houses don't stay on the market. I don't want to lose those families in our neighborhood. I was down in Patterson Park on Saturday for the, what was it, the lantern, the lidded lanterns, when there was so many people out with families. It was a diverse group. I mean, I felt really high energy, and you want that to happen all over our city.
Mayor Brandon Scott has a holistic crime plan in place. He rolled that out several years ago. He says it's a 5-year plan. You say you will also take a holistic look at the way. Is your plan different, or would you continue what he's doing?
Well, let me say this. I've always taken whatever I've been involved in, a holistic approach, because you can't just take one approach. But people have to be held accountable. We have to work with our public safety partners across the board, from the federal level to the judges to the state. Everybody has to be at the table doing their part, parole and probation. We have to also look at what our nonprofits are doing and try to be supportive of them if it's something that is effective, because my belief is you can have a lot of different programs that are out there, but you also have to look at the effectiveness of these programs. So I've always looked at everything holistically.
Well, you opened up a box that I was planning on getting to later, but we'll dive into it right now. I want to talk about Safe Streets, and it's a program that you brought to Baltimore City when you were in the mayor's position. Are you satisfied with how the program is being run right now?
From the outside looking in and the information that I've obtained, I think there's some good qualities for Safe Streets, but I also think that Safe Streets has taken a different direction.
How so?
Originally, how we planned it. Well, just based on what I'm hearing as relates to rallies going on in communities, and believe me, don't take this the wrong way, I believe in helping to support families with Pampers and diapers and things like that, but maybe there should be some other groups that are like church groups and other institutions, religious institutions and other organizations doing that, while those individuals on Safe Streets, it's like the Peace Group that's over in West Baltimore. The gentleman that was a part of our panel, he said, I don't have an office. My office is in the rain, in the snow, in the heat, outside, talking to those individuals, trying to help them to change their lives, and providing some resources where we can. And that's how Safe Streets was initially initiated. Came from Chicago. It was called Ceasefire. So I think we need to get back to some basic fundamental things if we're going to keep it in place.
All right, I want to continue this conversation about Safe Streets, but first we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Judge Hurd, did you know parole and probation?
You know,
Oh, I didn't. Okay.
All right, welcome back to a Fox 45 News, Your Voice, Your Future City in Crisis Town Hall. We're continuing our discussion with several members of our panel. And former Mayor Sheila Dixon, I want to continue talking about Safe Streets because, as you know, and many of our audience members, and I'm sure our viewers at home are aware, we've been investigating Safe Streets for 2 years now. And a recent investigation I want to talk about found thousands of dollars of federal COVID money was used by the various Safe Streets locations to buy sneakers and send some of the members from the locations to Los Angeles for a training, again, using federal COVID money to do that. You talk about hosting these community events. That was the explanation that we heard from Safe Streets as to why they spent thousands of dollars and hundreds of dollars specifically on sneakers to give away to the community. They say that's a way to build relationships in the community. Is that something that you believe is an appropriate use of money, especially given the fact that Safe Streets is a taxpayer-funded program?
I don't necessarily agree with that philosophy of giving away items in order to get people's trust. I mean, I think it's about giving them the resources for them to either get a job, go back to school, assist them in empowering themselves to make a difference in their lives. And so I don't necessarily agree with that philosophy. We had very little money when we first started Safe Streets. Probably one of the most successful ones was in Cherry Hill. Crime went down. We did intensive training, mental health training for those individuals who were part of that. I mean, they were very engaged. They were from that community. I think that's important that the individuals come from the community, not necessarily live in one area and then work in another area where people don't know who you are and what your past life has been about. But again, I think an audit does need to be done. That's the next question. And I think it needs to be done externally. And, you know, I'm from the outside looking in.
Sure.
So I have certain things that I believe will need to happen moving forward.
Clyde, I want to ask you this because we've asked the city several times for information about how the Safe Streets program has won, and specifically we've asked for the names of the violence interrupters. Remember, these are people who are hired. They're not city employees. They are contracted, you know, with the nonprofits that are getting the contracts with the city. But the money being spent to hire them and their paychecks are coming from tax dollars. The city will not give us the names of those employees, citing safety. Do you agree with that?
I think transparency is key. If you have people that are benefiting from tax dollars, then there should be some accountability there. I do want to comment specifically on these violence interrupter programs. Although there is a place for them, let's get back to the real reason, or let's talk about the real reason why these violence interrupters are prevalent now. There was a cry from the community to go away from a certain style of policing. And so we have to address the fact that we can effectively we can constitutionally police our communities as long as you have the right people in place making the right calls. So once we got away from effectively constitutionally policing our communities, that's when you have an opportunity for violence interrupted groups and things like that to seize power. I think we need to go back to let's make policing a welcoming career path for our young people and not divert them to other things. And if we can get young people to start being excited about being in law enforcement, then we can start seeing the change that they want to see, because that's how we all become a part of the community. Get involved, come down, become a police officer, become an attorney, become a firefighter, get involved in public safety, and then you'll start to see changes in our community.
I totally agree with what the president, I really feel strongly that I got to speak about this.
Yeah.
This idea of identifying one group that's going to come in and fix it. You know, this one group, whether it be Safe Streets or even the police department, that's not going to work. As long as you have everyone sitting in their silos, you know, you've got the police sitting in their silos trying to get home, and Safe Street comes in, and then you have all these disjunctive other programs, and there are other programs that are successful and active in our city. They may not get the attention, they may not even get the funding that is out there, but they're doing the work. They're police that don't value the citizens that they serve. There are teachers that don't value the students in Baltimore City that they're supposed to teach and educate. And you take that theory and you multiply it throughout the city, you get crime, because you have hopelessness and you have people just trying to make ends meet. And I really feel strongly that until we work together in a collaboration together, we're going to continue to have what we have. You know, they say, it's the old saying, you keep doing the same thing and looking for a different result. Well, we're doing the same thing. Our schools are failing. They're failing. So what are the kids supposed to do when they graduate? How are they supposed to feed their families, to feed them and clothe themselves? It is a shame that we are into policing as opposed to engagement. If you work a post like Brooklyn, you should know the residents in that neighborhood, and you should know if there's an event that happens every year. And then all of a sudden on that day, you're surprised when a couple of 100,000 people show up? Really? That's ridiculous. And it's not giving the citizens of Baltimore City what they deserve. Somebody said they deserve better.
No,
and
no,
I believe
I agree.
that it's true.
You know, I agree. And I think that, and Sergeant Boatwright said it first, you know, sometimes when you have something effective that's working, one of the things that we have to do differently in Baltimore is not necessarily throw it out because it was somebody else's idea. Right. We had a great academy, public safety academy, at Walbrook. I don't know what it's called now. I think it's called KIPP Academy now. But at Walbrook High School, where young people were coming there for police, public safety related, fire, EMS, people that grew up, lived in Baltimore City. And I always use this example of a relative of mine who's retired, who had the Northern District and on York Road. And he said that, as Judge Hurd said, engage. When he was out with his team walking the beat, talking to the individuals, if they were shooting crap or whatever they're doing, he made it very clear. Now, he grew up in Baltimore City. He said, we're not having this. Move it on. We're not going to deal with it. And to this day, he gets calls from people at Northern saying, boy, we sure miss you being over in this particular area, because he was engaged. You know, he didn't threaten it. He said, look, I'm not having this. I'm not going to be writing up any incidents. Move on.
I want to get to a couple of our viewer-submitted questions, but first we're going to take another quick break. Stay with us. Welcome back to a Fox 45 News, Your Voice, Your Future City in Crisis Town Hall. Let's get right to some of our submitted questions. And we have a lot of different questions and a lot of topics to get to tonight, so I'm going to ask our panelists to please keep your answers a little more succinct as we move forward with this evening. First, I want to take a question. I think this is best for the police, so perhaps, Clyde, you can weigh in on this. This is from Ron from Fells Point. Every officer that I talk to is looking to either retire or go to another police department due to the, this is Ron's words, horrible working conditions, being paid less than other police departments, and no trust in their leadership. What should Baltimore do to both retain and hire police officers?
We need to start by looking at what will attract our officers. What we're finding, young people that get into policing, they're concerned about time off. That's one of the things that we've looked at as, you know, one of their priorities. They just want to be off. When they're off, they're off. Some of our older officers are looking for paid benefits and working conditions. They're looking for better pensions. They're looking to protect their pensions. They're looking for our elected officials to stop threatening to take pensions if you're involved in an incident. They're looking to protect their homes as far as, you know, making sure that qualified immunity is not attacked. So it's those type of fears. I can tell you right now, the biggest thing for us as the Fraternal Order of Police, and I represent 21,000 members across the state of Maryland, is they're concerned about being prosecuted for doing their job. If we all know that there was a recent law that was just passed that the Attorney General's office is now the primary investigator for police-involved incidents, whether it's death or serious bodily injury. The state's attorneys were against it. Us as the FOP was against it. But that is the biggest fear right now, that our police officers are going to be prosecuted for simply just doing their job.
I want to talk about the General Assembly, and that brings us to several other topics, including another viewer-submitted question. This is from Sharon from Baltimore. She says, what are your plans to approach the Maryland legislature and ask them to revise and or abolish the juvenile justice reforms they've made? Former Mayor Dixon, why don't you take that question, and I have a couple follow-ups of my own.
So to be succinct, I think that the General Assembly needs to come back together sooner than January. And I know that there's been some workshops and meetings to really look at what the current laws look at. And I believe that you're going to find citizens coming down more in January than ever before to really make the kind of changes, because you don't want to we don't want to lock up everybody, but you do have to have accountability. And juveniles have to be accountable. You know, I go back to, well, now I'm getting ready to go off this topic because it's just about the family, but I'll touch more on that. And so, you know, I will be looking at ways that I can work with the legislators.
Well, first of all, you said that the lawmakers need to come back before January. Does that mean that you think there should be a special session?
Not necessarily a special session, but I believe that they need to come back and have a plan of action in place and have discussion going on now so that when they go back in January and when that time period where they drop those particular bills, and the citizens will have an opportunity to review them ahead of time, because the session is from January to April. It's a short period of time. It's very intense. There's so many special interest groups and other things going on that this topic has to be addressed.
If elected, would you use the power of your position to lobby for legislation that you believe could help address violent crime, whether it's with adults or juveniles in Baltimore City?
I worked hard as former mayor, city council president, going down to Annapolis. It was very effective in helping us reduce crime by having changes done in the legislation.
Is that missing from the current administration, that power of the bully pulpit to call for legislation?
I think what's missing is the leadership to have really qualified individuals who understand the process down in Annapolis.
Judge Hurd, we've heard from parents, police, prosecutors talk about the current juvenile bills or laws now that they believe are tying their hands when it comes to holding young people accountable. By contrast, the architects and some of the supporters of that legislation argue that it's the police and prosecutors' misunderstanding of the laws that's resulting in this situation. What's your take on this?
Well, first of all, I think we have phenomenal state's attorney, Ivan Bates, in Baltimore City. And he's made it he's made it very clear that accountability, just as Mayor Dixon has said, is utmost importance when you're dealing with juveniles. We all grew up in families. You know how it was. If there was a consequence, you changed your behavior. If there was not a consequence, you kept doing what you were doing. And we, as judges, know what it looks like when an adult never learned consequences, because they grow up, they commit crimes, and they're in my courtroom, and now I have to teach an adult what consequences look like. The reality is, I don't want, never wanted to see our jails filled with children. Never wanted that. But when you don't fund the programs that you have adequately, when you don't provide the monies for the programs that do exist, then the perception is that we're just locking up all the kids. And then you get the type of legislation we got coming out of Annapolis. I talked to an officer, and I think he was also interviewed. He said that, he pulled over a car, he got the car, stopped, and it was an 11 or 12-year-old riding with 16-year-olds in the back seat. He jumps out and says, "You gonna call my mother?" He's not worried about being detained or going to baby booking or anything else, because things have changed. And you can't even ask him any questions any longer. Not really. These are police officers who are on the scene. They're not lawyers. They're looking at the law the best they know how on the street, on the fly, so to speak. And so when they have a kid who doesn't want to cooperate, and they know they're up against the possibility that if they try to press it, they might get sued for their behavior, you have the difficulty that we have right now. And you wonder why it looks like we're out of control.
Well, let me ask you this.
Perhaps the young person needs to be in the presence of some of these legislators. Or perhaps the legislators need to go on ride-alongs. It used to be back in the day that they would show up with the police and go on ride-alongs and actually see what goes on in the community. Or maybe they need to take a visit out to some of the juvenile detention centers and actually see what's going on. Now, they might do a yearly visit. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about day to day, sit in court, in juvenile court, and actually see how these kids are not being monitored.
Judge Hurd, I think they do the drive-alongs. I think they need to go and visit some of these young people's households to see what the environment that they're in what has to happen.
That too.
Judge Hurd, I want to ask you, do you think that the General Assembly bears responsibility for this uptick in juvenile crime that we're seeing?
I can't say that. I just know that there's been a marked difference in the response of law enforcement, and I have seen and heard from prosecutors who say the same thing. Our hands have been tied. There are facilities out there that could manage juveniles, but they're not being funded. You can't. A lot of the juvenile judges will tell you that when it gets time to decide what to do with an individual, we may not even have the programs sufficient in Maryland to help that youngster. Then they may have to be shipped to another state. That costs money, and it doesn't happen. And so, there's a program, an excellent program called Youthful Offenders Program.
At Patuxent?
That program requires that a juvenile be held accountable for his behavior as an adult. Those crimes are usually violent crimes. They get a counselor, a therapist, they get an educator. They sit as a group, interdisciplinary group, and analyze what's wrong with that young person, whether it's their family, whether there's trauma, whether they have mental illness. And as a group, they address that while the juvenile is incarcerated. Not on an ankle bracelet, not sent home every day, but incarcerated. And they treat that person not for, a few months, but for years, because they're serving a sentence, holding them accountable for their criminal behavior.
I would like to add something to that.
Sure, please do.
The social job reserve community is a strong faith-based system. There's the strong education system, strong families, then you have cops, courts, and corrections. If you have the top three working, a strong foundation with religions institutions, a strong education system, and strong families, there will be no need for the other three.
I want to know from your perspective, what are you hearing from your members when it comes to these new juvenile laws? Because we often hear, again, from police, prosecutors, and parents who are arguing that this isn't working. And I spoke with some of the sponsors of this legislation, and they say it's the officers who just don't understand what their role is or what their responsibilities are.
What we see every day is we're now treating a person that's stealing to survive a loaf of bread the same as we're treating a person that's intentionally arming themselves with a gun and putting a gun in someone's face and taking their belongings. We're treating those two people the same. And that is the problem with this system. We have to be able to allow our judges to be able to distinguish the difference between the two, a person that's trying to survive and a person that's trying to do it for social media.
But when it comes to the juveniles who are doing this, do you believe that officers don't understand their rights and their responsibilities?
Again, there's a difference between a child in need of services and a child that needs assistance. There's two different things. So to have the law state that we have to force this child to a diversionary program before they're even held accountable for the action, my question is, and it's simply put, who speaks for the victims? At some point, we got to speak for those that are impacted by this.
And if the legislators feel that the police don't understand the laws, it goes back to when I was mayor and Pat Jessamy was state's attorney, and we all sat down through the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, where we were in each other's faces pointing out our weaknesses and strengths. And she said one of the weaknesses of the Baltimore City Police Department was writing reports. So she set up a training program. If that's the case, and that's what the legislators feel, then they need to come in, work with the respective regions, districts, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, or wherever else, and explain and train those officers that that is the case, so that officers do know.
And that council was disbanded under Hogan. They took the money. They took the money back because they were meeting, they were having lunch, but he said they weren't doing very much.
Well, my understanding is that
they're supposed to put
it's back.
The mayor didn't want it anymore. She wanted the money.
Well,
and from my understanding, the coordinating council has been restored, and it's the judicial branch that hasn't participated historically in that conversation.
But that's because it should not be at City Hall. It should not be a political entity. It should be back where it was in the courthouse, where you have the judges, where you have parole and probation, where you have all of public safety sitting in a public meeting and talking to each other and looking at our respective areas and what we all need to do.
Clyde, I know that there was another hearing. The House Judiciary Committee had a hearing a couple of months ago talking about juvenile crime. There's another one scheduled for November 8th, and from what I saw on the agenda, the FOP is scheduled to participate. Do you think that it will be brought up during the presentation that perhaps the lawmakers need to do a better job at explaining to officers or providing some sort of training for them so they know what their role is in this conversation when it comes to juvenile crime?
Yeah, right now, as far as our priorities for the Fraternal Order of Police, we've been meeting regularly to determine what is going to be our best course of action, and we look forward to presenting on November 8th when we get the opportunity.
All right, with that, we're going to head off to another quick break. Stay with us. We have several more viewer-submitted questions we'll get to when we come back. right, welcome back to a Fox 45 News, Your Voice, Your Future, City in Crisis Town Hall. This is a question from Tiffany from Baltimore, and I want to go down the list and have all of our panelists answer this question. But first, we'll start with the woman looking to take this man's job. What do you think is the worst mistake the Brandon Scott administration has made, and what would you do differently in that situation?
Wow.
Let me say this. I believe that Mayor Scott is a nice person, but I also understand the function of city government. I think we've lost sight of our function. Public safety, making our city safe. Basic fundamental services, picking up trash, making sure our roads are straight, dealing with all the taxes and reassessing whether or not we need it, making sure that our water bills are correct and not estimated, making sure that we are drinking healthy. We had the best water in the country, making sure our water. So there are a lot of basic things that I think people have lost sight of what your role is in city government. And then last but not least, you want to work in partnership with the business community, with our community associations, our nonprofits. And I just don't see those connections and partnerships going on.
How would you ensure, if elected, that city services are restored, that the people feel safe in their communities, and that there is a relationship with other sectors in Baltimore?
Finding the best talented individuals who are going to be part of this team, because one person can't do it all and you need a good committed team. Secondly, I will work and reach out to the business community as well as the nonprofit community and our community association to let them know that they are part of being at the table, helping us to make decisions, because one person doesn't make all the decisions. Last but not least, I've never, ever heard of city government having all of the departments being dysfunctional. Maybe you have one or two, but all of them, the fire would be under everybody's feet to understand we work for the citizens and the taxpayers of Baltimore. And so we're going to work 24/7 to get things in order and moving forward.
Do you think Mayor Scott has lost sight of that?
I think his administration has lost sight of that.
Judge Hurd, you live in Baltimore City. From your perspective, what do you think has been the biggest, worst mistake or biggest failure from the Scott administration?
What she said. Exactly. What she said. She laid it out perfectly. And you cannot singularly address each individual problem as it comes up. It's a holistic approach. And by the way, Baltimore doesn't sit in Maryland by itself. It's a region, and you need to build coalitions inside and outside of Baltimore because they affect what is going on in Baltimore. People come from the counties to work in Baltimore City, and they may then get in their cars and leave, but they do work in Baltimore City. This is a regional application, and you've got to be respected regionally for your ability to solve problems. And if you are dysfunctional in all of your agencies, that doesn't bode well as someone you might want to partner with.
Clyde, you mentioned earlier about having the right leadership in place, especially when it comes to helping with retention and recruitment for Baltimore police officers. Do you think the right leadership is in place right now in the Baltimore Police Department?
Well, right now we have someone that understands what it's like to come all the way through the ranks. But I would caution any leader, whether it's the mayor, the police commissioner, or anyone that's in charge, to surround themselves with people that are not afraid to challenge them. There's an old saying that if we all in a room agree, then somebody's not needed. And I think that should be the approach. Be able to look at differing opinions and bring the right and best and brightest. Because it's funny, now we're starting to see homegrown people, but for a long time, people were brought in from out of town and given an opportunity to tell us what's best for us in our community. So we need to look within and see who's the best fit.
But we shouldn't be afraid. We shouldn't be afraid of new ideas. We shouldn't be afraid of what might have worked in Detroit that had the same problem that we had. we shouldn't be afraid of what happened in New York. You know, that is the same thing that happened there, and we have that same problem. That's how you pull together the best and the brightest.
Yes.
You bring those ideas together for a fix. And we shouldn't be afraid to learn. You know, I'm not a Baltimorean. I didn't grow up here. I went to school here. I love this city, and I chose to stay here and raise my family. But I recognize that we have so many valuable things right here in this city.
Yes.
Imagine what the city would look like if we got those problems under control. We righted the ship. We sit on the water. How many cities that you know where you can still afford to buy a home not far from the water? And how many cities do you know that have parks and schools and hospitals and medical facilities? You know, we've got what it takes right here. We've just got to work together to make it better.
Yes.
One of the public safety agencies that the mayor created when he was elected in 2020 was the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, MONSE. It is a public safety agency that oversees the group violence reduction strategy that's being implemented in various police districts across the city. It also oversees the Safe Streets program. Former Mayor, if elected, would you keep MONSE in its current capacity, given the concerns that we've heard from various council members about the growth and expansion? Most of the funding comes from the federal ARPA dollars, which we know was one time. The funding cliff is upon us relatively soon. Do you have any concerns about keeping MONSE in place the way it's currently structured?
Because of being on the outside and not understanding how MONSE works, I really don't, to be honest with you, how it works, and I don't know whether or not it's effective or not. And so I would definitely assess it. What concerns me is using ARPA funds to fund organizations like MONSE, like other groups, that when that money is gone, what then happens? And so that's why, from my perspective, a lot of that money would have been used to assist city agencies like the fire department, who ended up having to get the money from the city council when they needed new equipment, like DPW, dealing with our roads. I would have put more of that one-time money into the infrastructure, because people don't realize that that is expensive to maintain the infrastructure and the loss of population. When we lose people, we're losing piggyback tax, we're losing sales tax, we're losing property tax, and a lot of that money goes to recreation and parks and other agencies. And so, you know, there might be a group that's out there in the community, as Judge Hurd mentioned, who's not getting certain resources that might be more effective than this. So I always believe in evaluating and assessing.
I know that the discussion tonight is really centering around public safety, but you mentioned how you would have spent ARPA dollars had you been in place. Do you think the city squandered the $641 billion or $1 million that the city got?
You know, I think that that's not a question for me, because I'm not on the inside. I think it's a question more for somebody who sits on the budget committee on the city council or the finance director. So, because I don't know. I know that all the money has not been spent. I know that some of it has gone to some projects that are close to my heart, a capital project that I'm engaged in, where we had applied for matching funds. So that's, you know, again, all of that would have to be really assessed.
$641 million, excuse me for that mistake. Still a lot of money. I want to go to another viewer question, and this is from Max from Walbrook. And it says, it seems politicians are able to play with people's lives with no consequence. Do you think the public is entitled to a breakdown of how the new juvenile justice laws have led to increases in crime and loss of property and life. I know this goes back to a topic we were previously discussing, but it seems like an important conversation that people want to hear from. We'll go down the list, but former Mayor Dixon, you can take the first step.
I would say yes, we need to be transparent. We need to share with the public as a result of what has happened, how much money has been spent or what has not been done. I mean, I think we have to be transparent across the board. There's really no reason to hide from the public so that people will know the benefits or the disadvantage in it.
So going back, though, do you think that it's up to the leader of the city to call on the lawmakers in Annapolis to provide that information and to be transparent about what they are expecting from the local entities?
I think that all of our electeds across the state of Maryland, all 24 counties in Baltimore City, need to go down to Annapolis and make that known, as well as educate our public, the citizens. A lot of people are confused about the role of the state, the city, the federal government, and I think that's where we play a role as well, because each citizen should deserve that.
We have more questions that we'll get to as soon as we come back from another quick break. Stay with us. Back to Your Voice, Your Future, Fox 45 News, City in Crisis Town Hall. We are running short on time, so I want to ask the panelists for briefly and very, very briefly, just to explain to the people at home who may be watching, former mayor, why you believe that you should be the one voters should choose during the primary election in May.
Very briefly, people twisted my arm. I love this city, and I'm committed to Baltimore. And despite the fact that I was not going to get into this race and I tried to work with the current administration, I realized that this is an opportunity for me to really go back and to show people the kind of leader that I can be, transparent, be open to the public, and really move the city forward and create a structure and system that not only will sustain itself, but will work with young people who want to get into government for the right reasons and then build on that.
You ran several times before. Why do you think this time the people of Baltimore want to see you in the mayor's office again?
Because they stop me every day, 24/7, not 24 hours a day, but I get stopped a lot. And
all right, thank you so much.
Some other time, we will assess the last two elections, but we won't do that now.
All right, thank you so much for joining us for this evening's discussion, and we will see you the next time.
Can you please tell us what will you do about the vacant houses in Baltimore City?
Well, the bulk of the vacant houses are actually privately owned, and a plan that I had done extensive research on that ended up not passing, and now Councilwoman Odette Ramos has brought back, is the land bank, is one way that we can restore and work on those vacant properties the same way they did it in Detroit and Cleveland. It's a long process, but if you go online, you can look at the legislation. But we're also going to have to start putting a hammer on individuals who own properties and who are letting the properties sit. Yeah. And we've got all the laws in places, but we've got to implement some of those laws to send the message that it's not going to be acceptable to have that property. Either deal with it, or it's going to come down, or we're going to put it together with other properties and have a small developer come in and renovate it.
I just have a quick follow-up question to that, if I can. Do you believe that the current vacant home situation is a public safety threat to the city?
Oh, it clearly is, based on what has just recently happened. And it's been that way, but this is not something that has happened overnight. It's happened over years, and people don't realize the cost that it takes to deal with the vacant properties. And maybe with some of the recovery money, with the ARPA money, I don't know what all the criteria was, but I know people probably lost their homes through COVID. Maybe we would have been able to restore people back in their homes and have demolished some of the vacant properties.
Yes, my name is Yolanda, and we are homeowners. Can y'all raise your hand? We came together. And Sheila Dixon's good to see everybody. And you too said that you love the Baltimore City. We do too, because I wanted to go out and buy a house in the county. But we had bought a house through the Habitat for Humanity, and I'm going to say this real quick.
Great.
But we're not in a vacant house, and we are homeowners, and we would like to keep our homes and the upkeep on our home. But we've been writing like complaints for them to put a fence up at the end of the houses where people be in there shooting dope, getting high, and doing illegal stuff. And we request we need like a fence up. So we need to know, how do we go about getting it for the safety of our homes? Because next they're going to be trying to rob us. That's how I go. And we need to know what we need to do to keep our house safe and that our property value won't go down.
So, I'm not going to ask you your address, but if you hang around...
Patterson Park area.
Okay, and then you're probably going to need to describe more about... because Habitat is a great program, and I'm glad to see that, that you have
out. Take Habitat out.
Okay, when you were saying that you have homeowners, is there a vacant property? Why does the fence need to be up? I'm just trying to understand.
No, because again, they come in like it's 9 houses. They were modular homes, brand new homes.
Okay.
And it's like it's an open area at the last end of the house.
Okay.
They were supposed to have put like a playground there.
Okay.
And they didn't block it off, and all we needed to either cement it, or because there's rats in and out, and it's going to affect the other beautiful homes that we have.
It's like an empty lot?
It's not an empty lot. It's like an empty, like an
alleyway?
Yeah, it's like not an alleyway. It got grass in it.
Okay.
Right, and this just we need to close it up because our homes are gated community.
Okay.
And we would like that gated as well.
Okay.
Because we don't want our property value going down. So we sacrifice, and we want to be part of this movement too. Because I see God doing great things in Baltimore City, bringing about a change.
Yes, I agree.
Let me see if I can perhaps bring a point to that, and that's something that we've heard as well. Do you think that addressing the vacants under perhaps a Dixon administration would be a priority and something that we would see the issue taken more seriously, or those issues would be addressed quicker?
Both. You said to be succinct and quick.
Both.
Seriously and quicker.
And you have...
I did a lot of that under recession where I had no money. If I had the money that they had today, oh boy.
Judge Hurd,
I was just going to say, you have the laws on the books, you have a solicitor's office that represents Baltimore City, and you have criminal laws that are related to the effect of some of these things that used to be prosecuted back in Pat Jessamy's day, and you've got a very aggressive state's attorney, Ivan Bates, who's... So you have the tools. You just need to have a mayor who supports what they were going to do.
Hello, my name is Marvin Briscoe, and I'm from the Grove Park community. And we have an elementary school in Grove Park. and the mayor, you keep trying to meet with him over and over to make it a multi-purpose center, try to do something for the community. But community care, they want to give it to some big community care, healthcare center. And we've been down in City Hall about 5 or 6 times. We haven't met with him. He won't take our talk calls. And Yitzi is our council person. He won't come to our meetings. I would like to see that council people, who's their boss? Who hold them accountable? I know we put them in there.
The voters.
But if we don't, if you put them in there, what do we do with people who don't show? How about the mayor won't even meet with us? No. I just bought that house, you know. I want a meeting. I don't mind. One thing I know about you, you'll tell me no, but at least you'll meet with me. You know, I met with you a few times. You'll say no, and I don't have a problem with that, but, you know, at least meet with me. It's like I'm invisible, nobody hearing me. And I pay a lot of taxes.
I know.
And I love Baltimore like you. Carver, Highland Park, Morgan, Coppin, Kappa, Mason. I got a lot invested in Baltimore City. I need somebody like you that would meet with me and say, hey, I got other plans and you can help me with this. I don't agree with you, but don't ignore me.
Yeah.
I'm 64 years old. I don't want to be ignored.
No, I agree.
And he hasn't met with us.
Yeah.
The mayor didn't show up tonight.
I agree, and I think it's important. And if the mayor can't meet with you, then the mayor has a huge staff of close to $20 million in the mayor's budget. That I'm like, how do you have that amount of money in the mayor's budget? Somebody should have met with you about that project.
But if they have plans to give it to community care, I guess that's so it's ignoring me like I don't exist.
And I'll be honest with you, it's my understanding that that particular school went out for RFP. Did the community put a proposal in as well?
They didn't like what we put in.
Okay.
We only have one vacant place, and Grove Park is a beautiful place, y'all. I don't complain about nothing. Rats, nothing. It's a decent place.
Yeah.
We have one vacant space, and I'm an educator like you. I want to bring young people in there. We have a lot of young people in the neighborhood. I want them to come in, and I want older people use computer, use the building, multi-purpose center. All right, thank you.
Mayor Dixon, let me see again if I can put a point to that question. I think a lot of it comes down to constituent services, perhaps transparency, showing up for the people who put you in office. Is that something that you will commit to doing if elected?
Well, first of all, that has always been what drives me to do what I do. And so that's a question that you really don't even have to ask. I've always done that. I'm even out of public office and people call me about issues from A to Z, and I will figure out how to either put them in connect with somebody or get it addressed. I mean, I think that was one of the strong points from the time I got on the city council was constituent service. And so that will always be a part of who I am, no matter where I am and what I'm doing.
I know that another part of the constituent services, I've heard you talk about this before, is the fact that you want to see Baltimore City employees back in the office. The mayor unveiled a return to office plan that he expects to roll out in January of next year. Would you require city employees under a Dixon administration to work in the office?
Yes. You already know the answer to that.
Let's go do some more audience questions if we can.
First of all, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I don't need no mic. I want
you do have to speak in the mic.
We need you to speak into the mic for our viewers at home.
Can you hear? Oh, I want to give God some praise, because you know what Baltimore have lost? They forgot about God. We forgot about God. We're looking towards materialistic things that we love when we need to love one another. What I'm here for, you know how I go. I'm compassionate about the kids. We need to have a boot camp. We ain't got to send these kids to jail, but we need to have a boot camp where they don't go home for like 6 to 8 months, maybe a whole year. Give them some education. Get them the high school diploma, find them a job, get them a workshop. Schools don't even have workshops anymore. They don't even have home economics. These kids don't even know how to cook. And it's really sad that we allowed, we did this, not City Hall. They not in our houses. Well, they not in our homes. I blame most of us from home. We need to go back to the old school. You know what I mean? The old school, I'm sorry. No, my question is what I'm saying. That's what I want y'all to think about. Let's go back to the old school. Y'all took the way that we can't beat our children because of judges. I love you. We can't beat them. Now, the 3 and 4 years old that's coming up right now, you can't even beat them. Somebody gonna call, I saw you beating your child. We got a whipping. Did the beating hurt me? No. Look what it made me. You see what I'm saying? We got to go back to the old school. We got to chastise our kids. We got to show them respect. We got to teach them respect. And let me tell you something. I feel as though if we do a boot camp at one of these schools that nobody's using, that we ain't got money, you spending money in it, make that a boot camp for the kids, teach them what they need to know. Show them how to get respect. Teach them respect. And you talking about the police department. You see all these people in my police department nationwide. You already know what I'm all about, right? Like, check this out. They got their own handcuffs on their own back. They can't touch it. Old folks ain't doing no crime. It's these young kids. We need to go back. And I'm sorry to be excited. I'm so excited when it comes to them kids, man. Because y'all ain't old yet. You're going to get old if you live long enough, right? These kids going to be tearing us up. We can't come out the house now. What you think you're going to do in the next 10 years?
All right.
Do something about it.
All right. I do have a question that goes along with your point. I do have a question from a viewer-submitted question. We're going to move on to a question that is similar. It's similar to your point. It's similar to your point. And so I think you'll appreciate this question that we can have. I do want to hear from each member because this question is very important. We didn't get to this earlier, but this is from Isaac from Midtown Belvedere. And the question is, what sort of interventions would you suggest to keep high-risk individuals most prone to committing crimes from doing those same activities, especially if they are persistently in those high-risk environments throughout their life? And I think we can address and really point to the young people, because that's really routinely what we're hearing is these young people are a product of their environment. So what programs can we do to address those people who are in high-risk environments, especially at such a young age? Judge Hurge, why don't we start with you?
Well, there actually are programs. You know, we go back to the same idea that there aren't any programs out here. You need after-school programs and mentoring programs, but there's a whole host of folks out here that do that kind of work. There are sororities and fraternities all over the city that do mentoring of young people. There are churches that have after-school programs in their buildings. And then there are other community groups, nonprofits, that are in the schools and they're doing them. Perhaps we need to do an evaluation of parenting. If you work certain hours and your kid is between certain ages and you know that you have no one to supervise them while you're working, maybe we require that parent to sign your kid up for an after-school program or a tutoring program or something going on at the school. When I was coming up, there was an after-school program, and it didn't cost a lot of money. You could stay after school and do a number of different things to a certain hour. And what we're doing is we're letting the streets raise our kids. And so while we're out making money, maybe having to work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, no one's watching the kids. They're out hanging out and doing whatever kids will do. And, you know, I remember getting my fair share of corporal punishment from my parents, but the laws changed. You want to blame the judges for that? We're not legislators.
Correct.
We're enforcing the laws that have been made. So, you know, you can't make me take an oath to follow the law, and then when the law says you can't beat your kids, you get mad at me because I enforce the law. You voted the people in the legislature. You put them down there. If you don't like the laws on the books, then go down and testify.
These kids ain't scared of nothing.
Clyde, why don't you weigh in on perhaps what...
That's not the answer if the law is on the book, but there are programs that we can support. And if you know of kids and you know of programs and you say nothing, then you're starting to start the problem. Because if you know someone needs help and you know of programs that can help their son, daughter, you see them out there hanging out, you know, when are we going to, as a community, you know, I'm just going to say this real fast. once was a time that you could light up a cigarette anywhere you wanted. You could smoke a cigarette in the church if you wanted to, or in a restaurant. And then somehow the community decided it wasn't acceptable anymore. And you couldn't light up a cigarette at your desk. You couldn't, they used to have a smoking section of the restaurant. Well, they don't have that anymore. If you're at work, you gotta walk down the street and pass the little line. And you can't light up your cigarette anywhere because the community decided it was no longer acceptable. So when are we gonna decide that it's no longer acceptable for you to let your kids run wild?
Clyde, what do you... One more, I just want to get your take on this question before we get to another audience member question about programming and perhaps things that could be implemented to help people who are in high-risk environments not to fall into that trap of a life of crime.
Yeah, before I became a police officer, I worked at the Department of Juvenile Services, and at DJS, they had programs at the Charles Hickey School in Cheltenham, at Alfred Noyes, at Waxter Center. It was the Impact program, the Intermediate program, and the Enhanced program. They were 30, 60, and 90-day programs. And after those young people went through those programs, they were monitored, even at school, by their probation officer. The probation officer was a part of the school community, and if they had a caseload, they followed up with their young people, and they made sure that those that were on electronic monitoring did not violate any of the rules, any of the laws, because they were wraparound services. So I think if we go back and we start looking at programs that work, similar to what Mayor Dixon has said, and similar to what our judge has said, Judge Hurd has said, if you have the fear of being held of consequences, being held accountable for your actions, maybe we'll start to see a change in these young people.
All right, let's go to another audience question.
Hi, first I want to introduce myself. My name is Wendy Bozell, and I'm running for mayor. And I am the president of Upper Fells Point, and I'm a teacher for the last 10 years. And that's why I'm really here, is when my third student was shot and paralyzed, I knew I had to do something more for the city than just be a teacher. So I'm out there fighting, and I just wrote a grant for $80,000 to help where I live, Upper Fells, that had 300% increase in crime. But I think what we're missing, and why I'm here really, is because of education. We have 164 schools. The budget this year is going to be $1.7, you ready, billion. And then what we do is we give it to 164 principals to decide what they're going to do with this 10 million, 20 million. There's no accountability. I have been working as a teacher, and every time I ask for something, I'm told it's not in the budget. I worked 3 years out of school with no heat. So we really need to make some changes in that. But my question is, 58% of students now are currently truant. They don't come to school. So the mayor has a big plan. He's going to give a trophy to the school that has the best attendance. That's not what we need. We don't need a robocall anymore. We need truant officers going into the schools and making sure they go to school. Do you have that? Are you going to be able to do that?
So actually, Wendy and I had several conversations, because I'm a former teacher and education is my passion. And I actually work with an organization right now who's providing mental health services and partnering with schools. And we have hired former police officers who are now truant officers at the school. But they're not just truant officers checking on the children. They're also looking at what the needs are of the family. In one case, the family was living in a car, a mother and 3 kids. The person contacted me and said, hey, can you help out with this situation? I was able to call a particular council person, because when you call the homeless service number, you got a directory of 50 numbers. Nobody picking up the phone. How am I going to remember all of that? So I was able to help this family, but that's what it's going to take. Individuals to go out to the homes, meet with the families, find out what the challenges are. So I agree wholeheartedly. We have to do that.
Okay, let's take another audience question.
First of all, I would like to say good evening to everyone. That's respect, and that's what we're losing in this city. Okay, former Mayor Dixon, I really commend you on how you answered that Monzi question, especially coming from Mackenzie, because as we know in the past, literally they run away from that question. I really feel as though you enlightened us on the funding streams from the outside looking in, or what you would do if you were there. That was fantastic. But my question is to the panel, is that we know that we are 400 police short in this town. It's not much of a deterrent when you go around this town and you don't see police anywhere, you know? Even the least likely of us would do something knowing that nobody's watching us. Who cares, you know? So my question to the panel is, looking at the Baltimore City Police dissent decree, to all of you, pro and con, how do you feel about that to employ credible police officers to put this town back where it should be? Because I deal with a lot of youth, from football to baseball to a lot of sports, and I get around this city all the time. Like, thank you for your Facebook page, because I was looking on that and I thought, where is this at? So I'm like, oh, this is up at Union Hall. Get here. Thank you very much.
That's a great question, and I would like to have every member of the panel answer that. Clyde, I feel like it's most directly appropriate to have you kick us off.
Yeah, so I'm probably going to get in trouble for my comments, but, you know, good trouble, as what John Lewis would say. The consent decree is designed to make a small amount of people a whole lot of money. It is not. It was sold to us as a panacea that it's going to make us safe. And we've been against it from the beginning. That, you know, there are patterns and practices. And look, we can't deny what our community saw from the likes of the Gun Trace Task Force. Those guys are criminals. They didn't represent those that swore the oath that want to protect communities. And they're in jail where they belong. Some of them have been released, but the criminal justice system dealt with them. So those people who have sold to us that this consent decree was going to save our city, we were averaging 300 murders a year. That was just the wrong approach. I think the way that we can get to with the gentleman's question is to address that gap. We have to start at our middle schools and our high schools and our colleges and universities. We have, you know, best HBCUs and the best colleges in the area, and get these young people excited about this career field. It used to be generational. Look, I have two sons. I have an older daughter and two sons. My 21-year-old and my 17-year-old, if they even thought about being a police officer, that would be a problem. You know, because I don't want them to go into this career field because of the way that it has been demonized for so long. Yeah, it's no doubt. What we saw in Memphis, what we saw in Minneapolis, what we saw in Atlanta, what we saw here in Baltimore. It's no doubt that we had some issues in our profession, but there's no profession that's without flaw. So we have to now get people excited about being in law enforcement, excited about being firefighters, excited about being crime scene technicians, and think that public safety is the best way to go. And so I think that it starts with our youth, and I say the middle, high school, and college and universities. I
just have to ask, you talk about trust, and I know that trust in the community with police officers continues to be something that is a requirement and a necessity, really. I know that there have been some Baltimore City school police officers who are under federal investigation. How do you balance that?
So there's one particular school police officer that's under investigation, and that person maintains his innocence, and he's going to have his day in court. That's what the criminal justice system is designed for, and that's no different from any citizen. He is, you know, afforded his due process, and that's what we're waiting to see.
Judge Hurd?
I agree in part. I don't think that the consent decree is being implemented correctly. If the officers engage with a community person, they have a requirement. They have to fill out a form and fill out some information about who it is they talk to and why. If I don't want to be bothered with doing that, the best thing for me to do is stay in my car and not engage with the community person, because then I don't have to write anything. So the understanding of why it's important that not only do you engage, but we keep track of who you're talking to is to build the trust back into the community. But that's not happening. They sit in their cars because they don't want to have to do the paperwork, and that means they're not engaging, and the community is not seeing anything different. My dad said to me, when you apply for a job to go work somewhere, when they're interviewing you, you should be interviewing them. Well, why would a young person in the city want to go work for somebody who doesn't even want to get out of their car and talk to them? That's not a job they want, because it's not some corporation or business that looks like a good place to work. You got to do something within your structure to change the mentality of the people that work in the police department, to make them understand that they serve the people in Baltimore City. They're not watching animals in cages.
Absolutely.
They're human beings. And there's a host of problems that happen in the city. Not everybody needs to be arrested. Don't tell me you don't want to write a report, because we don't do reports on that anymore. That's ridiculous. There's got to be a training taking us back to a time, you know, I'm going to show my age. Y'all remember Officer Friendly? How many of you remember when they used to have cards, they were baseball cards, but they had pictures of police officers, and you would go around and you would get them, but you had to talk to the officer, and some of them would give you cards if you showed your report card and you got A's or you got a good report. That's a building of a trust and a relationship, so that maybe that kid will want to be a police officer, not because you say they should, but because they see it as a job that they want to be, they want to do. Well, we've lost that. Well, and how we get inside the mentality of the police department is to start with that consent decree. But don't do it the way it's being done now. Apply it the way it was meant to apply. Don't do community policing. Do community engagement. Like what she don't do what Mayor Dixon was talking about, having it a thrust for everyone. The citizens of Baltimore City demand you to come to work at City Hall and sit in your office and answer the phone. They demand you get out of your car and walk the community, walk the post, so you know Miss Lottie and everybody. Because if you know them by name, when you need them, you're going to need to know who did what. Miss Lottie sits in her window. She knows everybody on every street. She knows who did what. She knows their son. He knows the tag number. She knows what time they come, what time they leave, when the drugs are dropped off, where they're dropped off. She knows everything. But right now, you're sitting in your car, and then you get on the news, and you say, somebody out there knows what happened. Please come and tell us, because you know who did it.
I'm going to cut you guys off because I want to go. I want to get to as many audience member questions as possible. I want to honor everyone's time tonight. Let's hear from another audience member.
Because I agree with both to some degree, particularly on the consent and the money thing.
My name is Darrell Griffin.
Not tracking.
And this, to me, I found that it's all about culture. Culture has changed. You have the culture in the police department, culture in the education system, culture at City Hall, culture, you know. And policemen, we don't look at policemen as protectors anymore. And that's the part of the culture that has changed. We used to look at the police as our protectors in the neighborhood. I was out there in the streets when I was younger, but we had enough respect to know looking out for 5-0. They don't look out for 5-0 anymore because you see them at the parking lot and on their way back to the district. And that's it. We don't see them in the neighborhoods at all. The people out here driving like they're mad. They're running red lights, they're cutting in and out, they're doing 50 and 60 and 70 miles in a 30-mile zone. Police are not there, so they don't fear the police, okay? The culture of the education system. I've been told that they determine how many prisons to build by the time these kids are in the second grade, third grade because they can't read or write. If they know that, then change it. How can you get to the third grade without knowing how to read and write? Change that culture. Change the culture of City Hall. Get back, look, you work for us. I've been trying for 3 years to try to get some work done in my neighborhood. That Spinello destroyed the neighborhood, a whole block of the neighborhood, the curbs, and they won't come out and fix it. Destroyed the street. It wouldn't be allowed anywhere else, but I live on the east side. So we don't count. I'm ignored.
affected.
I've had neighbors put in for the same work, nothing happens. But we have to change the culture. There was one squeegee boy that did an interview, and they asked him, why aren't you in the school? He said, if they were teaching me something, I would be in school.
I did that interview. I know exactly what you're talking about. And I want to direct that question to former Mayor Sheila Dixon. We have less than 5 minutes in tonight's discussion. I want to try to get to one more audience question if we can. Former Mayor Dixon, how do you change the culture in the city? It's a big task.
Well, you start, as a leader, you start by being that example, and you start by showing the citizens that you are going to be responsive, and the people that work for you are going to be responsive. You know, it's like the question about the consent decree. You also have to, the difference is you also have to engage and be involved with that officer on the street. You have to have their feedback. It just doesn't start with the top and go down and say, you do what I say.
Right.
What do you see? What do you see is needed? I talk to officers all the time that used to be my executive protection who are in the police department. I ask them, well, how do you see us working with juveniles? And they've come up with some great ideas. So you've got to engage them as well. And that's how you change that culture. You know, recruitment, I think a school, recruitment, I think it's important that there are officers who have left the system who would love to come back and work, maybe on contract. We have to also keep in mind, University of Maryland has police. The school system has police. The sheriff's department, hospitals. How do we collaborate and say, hey, we need some help? Mm-hmm. Have your guys that are sitting in that box over at Hopkins walk around in that neighborhood. Same thing at the University of Maryland. MTA police. How can we collaborate and work to have that presence? You know, it's like when I visit my daughter in New York, there are police everywhere. I feel safe because I see them.
Let's get to the final audience question before we run out of time tonight.
Yes, my name is Keith. How's everybody? I don't have no question. I just want to share something with you all.
60 seconds.
About the city in crisis. I'm en route to the city in crisis. I lived it all. I didn't call news stations. I didn't call Adrian Jones' office to try to get my story out here. This is not going anywhere. What we are dealing with is a generational curse, and it starts with trauma, mental illness, drug addiction, murders, crime, and forever. Mm-hmm. It's not going to stop until we make some adjustments in our schools, in our churches, and teach these kids the way they ought to be taught. So as they get older, they won't depart from us. Mm-hmm. The kids are not being taught. There's no fathers out there in these homes. Mm-hmm. Do y'all know what it's like growing up and you want to play baseball and your father alcoholic and he beating his girlfriend up at 6 years old and you crying, he breaking up everything? Do you know what that does to a child when your father's not there? Trauma. It's trauma. Mm-hmm. This is what we're dealing with. That's why these kids are angry. They are angry. And the wound is so deep. Mm-hmm. And it's going to, what's on the street is going to play out. We must break this curse by stopping these kids from dropping out of school. The same kids that can't read and write are the kids on the street. Mm-hmm. That's right. The ones that can't read and write was once the kids want to be a baseball player, football player. Mm-hmm. And you say hold kids accountable. You cannot hold these kids accountable. We're not accountable. Amen. For making a way for them. We are the world. We are the children. Only we can make it better. It's resources out here, finances, and our taxpayers' money pays for all this to go night-night. Yes. You want to hold safe streets accountable? You hold lottery accountable? You hold the drug legalizing drugs, the money accountable? All these resources to help our children. These are poor, innocent kids that's exposed to all this gun violence and shootings. Mm-hmm. First thing you say, when these kids been exposed to this trauma, they're going to say, are you okay? I'm okay. I'm okay. I couldn't read in the 4th grade. I could not read. I was so afraid to ask somebody why a child go to elementary school and high school and cannot read because of fear. Yeah. Fear paralyzes you. It keeps you from being who God created you to be. Mm-hmm. And we don't see this because trauma blinds you. We live in it. We grow up in it, y'all. Daddy not there. Abusive relationships. You're never going to get to the root of it until we stop the kids from dropping out of school. And it starts from the head.
All right, thank you so much. And that brings up an important topic of education. That was our last audience question, and I assume that we will continue to have these conversations. Obviously, education is a major concern for a lot of voters out there in Baltimore City, and I look forward to future conversations with our panelists and future panelists to discuss ways to improve student outcomes. It looks like we are out of time for tonight. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us this evening. Thank you for everyone for participating and watching. I also want to thank Bishop Angel Nunez for letting us use his church this evening, the Christian Bilingual Church of Baltimore. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and have a great night.